So the truth is, I wasn't going to do this verbal walkthrough today because frankly, I hadn't had that much sleep. And I thought, you know what, I'm not going to be at my best and it probably won't go that well in terms of me going through the test under time conditions. But then I realized a lot of people before their test don't get that much sleep and they still do the test. So I figured this is going to be kind of realistic, okay? Doing a verbal section, 20 questions in 30 minutes, from the notoriously difficult Magoosh website, link in the description, even without that much sleep. So if you're prepared for me to get a few wrong, then get settled in and take the test along with me if you can. I will try my best to be teaching as I go along, but obviously because it's time conditions, that might not always be possible. Without further ado, let's start the timer and tackle this first question. Choose the option that best answers the question. Some of today's tech CEOs are spoken of in the press and on social media in such tones that they have taken on a nearly messianic, like a savior, so it's praising tones. Quality, entrepreneurs following their every move like a gaggle of disciples. So this is going to be highly praising, reverential. All the other words aren't praising enough. Be quite quick on these to save time for reading comp. Since memories of recent events tend to be far more accessible, during a prolonged economic upswing, investors often stop and think, as I talk about in my reading comp videos. If the memories of recent events are accessible, as in you can reach those memories easily, during a prolonged economic upswing, people have memories of that and it's fresh. I'm guessing investors get overexcited. I don't know. Plausible scenarios forecasting a recession. So how would they react to plausible scenarios forecasting a recession? Well, if they've got memories of all these happy times that are happening recently, I guess they dismiss or ignore or attack. Discount. That's the only one that kind of says no. I don't believe in these scenarios about recession. I've got all these happy memories of an economic upswing. Obviously in the real test, I would click it and move on. But for you guys, I'm just explaining my answer a little bit. They're going to discount those scenarios. Oh my, that passage is massive. I've never seen a passage that long. Holy moly. Okay. I might not be able to read slowly on this one. Let's see. Don Giovanni, what is perhaps Mozart's best-known opera, there exist two distinct endings, a phenomenon not entirely unknown during the composer's time, but one that invites the obvious question, why did Mozart decide to include alternate endings for Don Giovanni when he did not do the same with these other famous operas? So it had two distinct endings, and why didn't he do that with the other operas? Why didn't they have alternate endings? Stop and summarize. Another question, and one not so obvious, is why was Mozart himself uncertain as to which of the two endings to choose, as is evidenced in his correspondence with this dude? Okay, so he wasn't sure which ending to do. A common answer is to treat both these questions as one. Mozart was uncertain as to which ending to provide, so he wrote both endings, so he just wasn't sure which ending to use. Such a reply ignores an important consideration. Why did Mozart decide to provide these specific endings? Okay, so the author's not so sure that Mozart was just uncertain. Leibard provides a reasonable answer. The traditional ending, in the sense that it is the one that was popular during the composer's day and continues to be so today, is clearly more palatable for audiences. So this dude, Leibard, made up an answer, and he said that the traditional ending is what the audiences wanted. The hero, Don Giovanni, is chided for his libertine ways, that's in my vocab list, and then the cast appears in tutti. Don't know what that means, bellowing a merry chorus as the curtain falls. The audience is left having a light dose of entertainment, which after all was the aim of many of the operas of Mozart's time. So it's just a nice, easy ending, this first one. Fine, but then what of the tragic ending? Leibard trading the sensible for the pat. That's an insult. He's saying he's not being sensible anymore. He's trading the sensible for the pat. Offers little more than that such an ending reflects the political climate of the day. So this Leibard came up with an explanation for the two endings. One was popular, one was political, but the author thinks this is not a good explanation. This alternate ending, the bad one, the tragic one, Don Giovanni is suddenly cast down to hell, and instead of being redeemed, the hero emerges from the underworld chastened. was interpreted by the critics of the day as heavy-handed didacticism, a word in my vocab list. It means teaching, trying to teach people. Okay, so that was too much of a teachy kind of ending, so they didn't like it, a moralistic ending. While such a view is not entirely without merit, Mozart ultimately aimed to impart some lesson for the incorrigible Lothario. It still leaves the question unanswered as to why two endings and what exactly did Mozart aim to communicate that could not be housed in the traditional ending. The author thinks that the view of it being a teaching kind of ending has some merit, but the author's still not sure. One answer offered recently by this dude is that Mozart balked at including a traditional ending. Balked means resisted, didn't want to do, feeling that it was incongruous with the serious tone of most of the opera. So he didn't want to do the traditional ending, he wanted to do the tragic one. Indeed, Don Giovanni falls more under the rubric of seri than buffo, the latter typically featuring light endings in which the entire cast sings in an upbeat major key. Okay, so it's a serious one. Da Ponte, however, it's not a traditional one, because remember the traditional ones were all happy and all that. Da Ponte, however, insisted that forthwith casting Don Giovanni to hell and offering him scant opportunity for redemption would likely leave the audience feeling ambivalent. Such an ending would be so sad, it would also suggest that the librettist had been unable to think of a tidy resolution. So maybe Mozart just couldn't think of the ending. Da Ponte then was not so much against the tragic ending as he was an abrupt tragic ending. This is hard. Perhaps even Mozart was unsure of what to do with Don Giovanni once he was in hell, and may have even been working out a different ending using the light ending as a stopgap until he achieved such an aim. So is the author agreeing with this or not? I'm not sure. In that case, the fate of Don Giovanni can best be answered by the fact that Mozart, through debts, ill health, and the composer's obligation to compose works for his patrons, was unable to return to a work he had tabled. Okay, finally. So the author decides what he thinks happened, which is that Mozart was in debt and had bad health, and then basically decided to not return to a work, as in he left the stopgap ending, the happy ending, traditional light ending, and never went back to change it. Wow, that was a long passage. I'd never seen one that long in the real test, but I still read fairly slowly for me, maybe a bit faster than I normally would though. Obviously not taking any notes here, trying to understand it all in my head. In the context in which it is used, tabled most nearly means, well, tabled means, I'm not looking at the answers, it means like you put it down to come back to another day. He wasn't able to return to a work he had temporarily put down. Put aside indefinitely. Yeah, you've put it aside for an indefinite amount of time, not forgotten. Toiled over means worked hard, no. Not discarded, because he is going to come back to it. Considered, no. He just put it aside. He tabled it. Let's come back to that discussion. Let's table that discussion. After all of that passage, and it's like a vocab question. Okay, here we go. By the way, this passage is so long that you probably would want to guess it and then come back to it, unless you're a student who's scoring in the high 160s, because this would take a lot of time if it was ever this long. The author of the passage would take exception to all of the following statements regarding Leibard's response to the existence of dual endings, except, well, Leibard was up here, and he was the one who said that the traditional ending was popular and palatable, and then the author doesn't agree with Leibard. He says he's not being sensible when he says that the tragic ending was just political. Okay, so Leibard's response to the existence of dual endings. He would take exception to all of these except, as in which one of these does he agree with? It's like a double negative. The author would disagree with all of these except. So the double negative means one of these the author agrees with. The explanations are not uniform in their usefulness. Yes, as in one of them is a good explanation, one of them is reasonable, and the other one is not sensible. So they do differ. They're not uniform. They're not the same in their usefulness. That is one that the author would agree with. So not that they're both rubbish, which is B. I don't think he talks about audiences too much. Obviously, running out of time a bit. I think I go for A. I don't have time to check if they agreed with Lucian or whatever. So I'm just going to pick that and then come back to it if I've got time. But probably I won't have time. According to the passage, Mozart's use of the tragic ending allowed him to accomplish which of the following? Consider each. He was able to teach a moral regarding wanton behavior. Well, the alternate ending was about morals, wasn't it? It's like didacticism, teaching people. He tried to impart a lesson for the dude. And wanton is kind of like incorrigible. So I think it's kind of like a vocab question. I think that's right. Okay, this one. He was able to be consistent with the conventions of the opera prevalent during his time. No, the consistent with the conventions is the happy ending, right? The traditional ending, the popular one, is more palatable. And it's merry and happy, entertainment. That's the traditional ending, the happy ending. So no, the tragic ending is not consistent with that. Okay, I understood that from the passage when I read slowly. He was able to provide a resolution that would allow audiences to feel satisfied. They're not satisfied with the tragic ending, right? They don't want the tragic ending. I don't think so, because I thought the audiences are only satisfied with a happy ending. No, I don't think that the tragic ending provides a resolution that the audiences are satisfied with. I think they didn't like the tragic ending. This is a really hard one. Okay. Select the sentence that describes an explanation of Mozart's contemporaries regarding the composer's objective in choosing a tragic ending. Describes an explanation of contemporaries. Contemporaries. Who were his contemporaries? I don't even know who his contemporaries were. Where are his contemporaries? Where did it say about that? Oh, his correspondence with Da Ponte. Oh, okay. So he was a contemporary because he corresponded with him. He wrote a letter to him. So we've got to find Da Ponte, who was at the end. Okay, finally found it. An explanation of the contemporaries regarding the composer's objective. So where does Da Ponte have an explanation about the objective? It would leave the audience feeling ambivalent. And then this is what Da Ponte thinks. And so this sentence, which one of these explains why Da Ponte thinks that? Is it that one? Or this one? One of these two? I think this one is more about Da Ponte though, right? It describes an explanation of the contemporary, Da Ponte, regarding the objective. I think it's that one. That's more of an explanation of what Da Ponte thinks. This is more what the author thinks, I think. This is an incredibly hard question. Okay, let's finally get to the more easier questions. Actually, that was bad grammar. Finally, we're getting to the more easy questions, not more easier. Anyway, I am down a bit on time, but I should be able to catch up by doing these fairly quickly. The proliferation of cell phones with multi-pixel digital cameras has enabled even the most something photographers to become citizen journalists, even like the worst ones, most unseasoned amateur. Yeah, don't have time to explain all of these. Ignoring the crowd's entreaties, calls for something, the judge remained implacable, stern, unchanging, meting out a punishment that was as harsh as it was arbitrary. The judge being harsh, ignoring the crowd's entreaties for mercy. Mercy is a synonym for clemency. Imperiled by excessive logging activity, so it's in danger, the Canadian snow goose, I've seen one of those, is unusually sensitive to encroachments into its territory, displaying an something. It's sensitive when people get into its space, and it's displaying what? That's rare. What do you display when you're sensitive about people getting into your space? Truculence, aggressiveness, and pugnacity is aggressiveness. I don't think arrogance and haughtiness both come together, but where is it? It's arrogant. It's not arrogant. There's no evidence for arrogance. I think, actually, is there evidence for pugnacity and truculence? I just think that if someone came into your territory and you're really sensitive, That wouldn't make you arrogant, it would make you angry, truculent. So I think it's those two. Okay. Academics, when locking rhetorical horns, can toss off the most pointed barbs by deploying nothing more than an understated phrase. So they're verbally jostling. So it should come as no surprise that they are also prone to seeing something where none exists. Seeing insults, seeing attacks on their dignity, because they're so used to doing pointed barbs, pointed attacks, witty remarks. They are prone to seeing slights, like attacks on their character. Snubs, slights, same thing basically, like verbal attacks when they don't exist, because they're so used to doing these verbal attacks, they're prone to seeing them all the time when none exist. Not rivalry, there's no matching word. Not conspiracy, there's no matching word. These two, misinterpretation, misperception, would fit together, but they don't make sense in the sentence. So I've got evidence for A and F, but I wouldn't have for C and E, which is why I'm picking it. Okay, critical reasoning, I think. While antibiotics have done inestimable, amazing, uncountable good to humankind over the last 70 years, there are several drawbacks to using antibiotics that, until recently, have been overlooked. Oh dear. The human microbiome, which consists of trillions of bacteria that reside in each person's body, is essential to good health. Specifically, the body contains and requires both good and bad bacteria. Cool. It is when the proper equilibrium, the balance between the good and the bad, is disrupted that a number of health issues can emerge. I bet they're about to say that antibiotics disrupt the balance. Nonetheless, antibiotics indiscriminately kill both the good and the bad bacteria. So each course of antibiotics should be followed by a treatment that restores the balance, I guess. Finds a way to go back to the equilibrium, is I'm guessing what they're going to say. I'm predicting an answer before I look at the answer choices. It's really important. Think about what you would say before you look at the answers. And what I would say is it's all about balance here. And so the author's probably saying that each course of antibiotics should be followed by a treatment that restores this balance. Restores the correct balance. I honestly didn't see that answer. I just thought, what would you say to end that sentence? Once American men returned from World War II battlefields, they quickly displaced the women who had temporarily filled jobs otherwise reserved for men. With many women reverting to their domestic role, the dramatic increase in birth rate is also perhaps not too surprising. Yet such factors alone cannot explain the increase in the number of births. So it's not just men returning from war. What is it? Murray suggests that both women and men's perspectives changed, mostly because of America's success in the war, leading to rapid population growth. So everyone got happy because they were winning the war, I guess, and had kids. However, oh dear, this position ignores the many middle and lower class women who continued working in factories and who contributed to the dramatic surge in population. Okay. Regarding this subset, the women who carried on in factories, the more plausible view, the more likely view, the more believable view, the more credible view is that couples were more likely to conceive based on the fact that they considered themselves part of a dual income household. Okay, so plausible in this context means believable, credible, worth giving credit to, not common, not accepted, not praiseworthy. Yeah, just vocab. That word appeared in my vocab list. Okay, the passage implies that the main shortcoming in Murray's view is that, well, it didn't account for the middle class women and the lower class women who carried on working in factories. Why did they keep having births if it was all about just going to domestic roles? That's the shortcoming in Murray. Fails to account for a particular segment of society. Yes, it ignores the middle and lower class women. And it's a subset, which is a synonym for segment. So look out for these little clues. Fails to account for a particular segment. Not this one, not C. It doesn't overemphasize factories. D is completely wrong. Only considers no. So B, based on the context and also those little clue words. Okay. Another critical reasoning. Wow. For much of the 20th century, paleontologists theorized that dinosaurs, like reptiles, were ectothermic. Their body temperature regulated externally. Okay, so they thought that dinosaurs were ectothermic. These scientists, however, based their conclusions on faulty reasoning, oh dear, claiming that scaly skin was common to all ectotherms. Birds do not have scaly skin. Okay, so the faulty reasoning was that scaly skin was common to all ectotherms. And the dinosaur's size could account for ectothermy. Some dinosaurs weighed as little as 10 pounds. So they thought the size made ectothermic, but then in brackets the author's saying, but look, some dinosaurs were only 10 pounds, very light. Replacing this theory is an entirely new line of thought. Dinosaurs were actually mesothermic, neither warm nor cold-blooded. Okay, cool. By taking this middle ground, some paleontologists maintain that dinosaurs were faster than a similar-sized reptile, yet did not require as much food as a similar-sized mammal. So they're kind of halfway, a bit faster than reptiles, not as hungry as mammals. To substantiate, to back up this theory, these guys intended to study how birds, the dinosaurs' closest relative, might have at one time been mesothermic. Interesting. I loved reading it, and you should always love reading these passages to learn stuff and enjoy learning about the world. The two brackets for me were the author stepping in and going, look, these guys were mistaken. Look, birds have scaly skin and they're ectothermic. Sorry, they don't have scaly skin. And the other bracket was like, but some dinosaurs are only 10 pounds. So for me, the brackets, the parentheses, were the author stepping in and correcting these 20th century paleontologists. Provide rebuttals. They do, not D, E though, they do furnish information. Provide rebuttals to commonly held views. Are they commonly held though? It's the 20th century. This is really tough. I'm kind of running out of time, so I probably would go for C, because the brackets do rebut the argument. They're not commonly held anymore, so that's what I don't like. And it is about the physical aspect, so I just have to pick that just based on time, essentially. Based on the information in the passage, it can be inferred, proven, that which of the following is a possible benefit conferred by mesothermy. That's the kind of balanced halfway one, wasn't it? They're not warm or cold. Because of this, they were faster than the reptiles. So it allows for greater speed, 100%. It leads to less dependence on food. Less dependence on food than mammals, but not necessarily ectotherms. Definitely didn't let them fly. I don't think. I don't really have time to check too much, but reading the passage slowly, I think allowed me to be relatively confident on that one. Okay. Sentence equivalence. Text completion. There is a rising consensus among immunologists that the observed rise in allergies in the general population can be attributed to something exposure to everyday germs. Frequent, decreased, heightened, we don't know. Known as the hygiene hypothesis, this counterintuitive idea could have far-reaching implications. If it's counterintuitive, I think I know what the blank is. The rise in allergies is attributed to the decreased exposure to germs, because that's counterintuitive. You get more germs, less exposure to germs, but then more allergies. Doesn't make sense. It's counterintuitive. So I think B fits here. That's the big clue. It has implications. For one, we may now have to be more something, those paternal prescriptions about being a father. What would a father do? To scrub our children's hands at every opportunity. So if the rise in allergies is due to less exposure to germs, we should be wary of the prescription, the advice to scrub our hands all the time. Because this hygiene is actually causing a rise in allergies. So wary, that's the only one saying don't do it. Don't scrub your hands all the time. The other two don't fit. The latest biography of Oppenheimer, he's the guy who created the atom bomb, I think, In attempting to dispel the pervasive notion, to disprove this idea that he was an something, only probably reinforced such a view. The attempt to dispel only perpetuated, I can guess that one easily, such a view. It continued that such a view, it reinforced it. Seemingly every one of here's the clue to the first blank. Seemingly every one of Oppenheimer's quirks is related with gleeful fondness. So they're saying he's quirky, a bit weird, eccentric. That's the word there. That's in my vocab list. Okay, 3 blank here. According to Lackmuller's latest screed, a screed is like a long, boring document, published under the title Why We Can't Win at Their Game, special interest groups not nominally tied to ecological concerns, so groups not tied to ecological concerns, have become so something, the process of environmental policy making, that those groups who actually do aim to ensure that corporate profit does not trump environmental health have been effectively something. The best guess there is that these groups who don't have ties to ecological concerns have so dominated the process of environmental policy making that the groups who actually do care about those issues, they want profit not to beat environmental health, have been effectively marginalized. So these groups, that's my best guess reading the context, these special interest groups have become so influential in the process that these groups who actually do care have been effectively squelched, which means just crushed. I think those two go together, and I think that makes sense, but I'm not entirely sure. Lackmuller's contention, however, is something in that it fails to account for the signal achievements of environmental groups. So the author's saying, but they did achieve loads of stuff. Environmental groups are amazing. So his conclusion is, okay, so one's light. Oh, it's tentative. The other's really harsh, highly misleading. I just think the word screed at the beginning suggests that the author really doesn't like this guy, Lackmuller, saying he's really boring. So I think misleading is more likely to be an attack that the author would do. So I'd go for that one. As spurious sightings of imaginary creatures, spurious, like not genuine, like rumoured sightings of imaginary creatures that have captured the popular mind, something, diminish or entail, I don't know. However, something a story may be, however apocryphal, not true, captivating, clever, story may be, once it has circulated enough times, it will gather a patina, like a covering of truth, I'm guessing. Spurious, so they're not real sightings. But once it's been circulated and talked about enough, it gathers a patina, a coating of truth. Suggest, maybe, suggest, however, however apocryphal, however untrue a story is, that makes sense. As these sightings suggest, however untrue and apocryphal the story is, once it's been circulated, it will gather a patina of truth. Wouldn't have too much time to explain that, but that would be my answer there. Okay, this one, I have to be quick. There are two skins or threads to Darwin's thought that are at first blush irreconcilable, probably. We'll have to see. Aligned, counterintuitive, we'll see. Darwin believed that a gradual change in the environment brought about commensurately gradual changes to organisms. Okay? Gradual changes, and therefore that man was no different from any other species. Yet, although he opposed the catastrophist, like a big disaster school of thought, which decided or put forward that animals change in the face of massive disasters, calamities, either perishing or adapting, yet though Darwin opposed this belief, he believed in gradualism, Darwin also implicated humankind, like said that humankind did it, right? That's where it's going. That's what the author's suggesting. It implicated humankind in the sudden disappearance of animals. thereby implying that man indeed was responsible, was unique amongst, because man causes other species to adapt or die, was unique among all other species, cause the extinction of other species. Beholden to, we're not in debt to other species, we cause their extinction. We're not opposed to them, we're unique because we cause others to die out. And such extinctions were the result of massive calamity man. And it is irreconcilable, right? Because he believes things change gradually, but he also thinks that humans cause mass extinctions, which isn't gradual. Okay, that was pretty rushed, but that would be my answer for this question. Submit, and we're done. So it wants me to put my email in, but I think there were answers down here. So I'm going to open those answers up and then come back to you in a second. I'm back, and here we have the first answer that I got right. Just quickly, in terms of my overall feelings before I look at all the answers, I feel like it was a very good test with the exception of that massive reading comp passage. It was crazy long, and I probably spent a bit too much time on that one because I was trying to demonstrate to you how slowly you can read, meaning that I had to speed up a bit for some of the later questions, because not only was it incredibly long, that passage, it was also really quite hard to work out what was going on with Mozart. So overall, I'm fairly happy with how I did. I don't know how many I got right and wrong. Given that I was tired, I'm fairly happy with my performance. But in terms of teaching you guys, I think most of you would want to guess that harder, really long reading comp passage and come back to it if you have time, because not all of you would be able to speed up like I did for the last 4 or 5 questions. So that would be my teaching lesson. Maybe skip that really hard reading comp if that happens. I think in the real test, it's unlikely to be that long, so you'd have more time. But if it does come up like that, maybe guess and then come back to it if you have time. Okay, let's go through the answers. This one was reverential because we're praising the messianic savior quality of the tech CEOs. So happy with that one. Yeah, discount. This was fine because they had memories of the happy economic times. So they discounted or ignored, discarded these scenarios that were forecasting recession. That can't happen. Okay. This one, yes, tabled did mean put aside indefinitely. That's almost a vocab style question. Let me zoom out a bit here so you can see it. Almost a vocab style question to know that tabled means in this context, it's just tabled. We're putting the motion to one side. We may come back to it, we may not. Indefinitely means for an uncertain amount of time that you're putting it aside. That was okay. The passage as a whole was really hard. Okay, I'm glad I got this one because this one was hard. That his explanations are not uniform in their usefulness. In other words, some of them were good, some of them were bad. They're not uniform, they're not the same. Because if you remember, we had one reasonable answer from Liebard and then one not sensible, trading the sensible for the pat. I didn't have time to explain it when I was doing the question, but it basically means you're swapping out being sensible for being pat and sort of predictable. So the author is implying that the Liebard is no longer being sensible. So that answer wasn't useful. I had no idea about some of the other answers, so I'm kind of glad that that one was correct. And this one. Yes, I'm glad I got this one right. I was really not too sure on this one. I was certain with A that the tragic ending was teaching moral behavior, because remember that word didactic or didacticism? I think it was around here somewhere. Where was it? Yeah, heavy-handed didacticism, trying to teach people a moral lesson. So I was pretty sure on A, and I was pretty sure it wasn't B, because the conventions at the time were to have happy endings, not tragic endings. It was just this one. I just didn't feel like it would leave audiences satisfied for there to be a tragic ending, because else why were the light entertainment endings popular if that's what the audience wanted? So I'm glad I got that right. Wasn't 100% sure. And this one, I think I've got it wrong. I picked the wrong sentence. Select the sentence that describes an explanation of his contemporaries. I missed that. The critics of his day. I didn't see that phrase. That does make them contemporaries as well. Okay, Oh, damn. That was so hard, though. That was so hard, because De Ponte was also a contemporary, because he corresponded with him. I'm sorry, that was such a hard question. So I don't think you'd have to... It does say very hard. But I wonder if they explain why it wasn't the other one. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. Why isn't the sentence that I picked, De Ponte, the correct answer? That's crazy. Someone else must have asked the same question. The objective. It's true that De Ponte was one of his contemporaries, but the question asks us about explanation of contemporaries. Okay, so we're supposed to realise that we want more than one person, and De Ponte is just one person. So hard. Okay, I'll let you read it. Link in the description if you want to read the full explanation, but that was tough. Okay, this one was fine just because it's talking about how the cameras are so good that even the most amateur, unskilled, unseasoned means like you're new to it. You don't have many seasons in it. You're a newbie. And even those kind of photographers can still be citizen journalists with their camera. This one, you need to know that clemency is a synonym of mercy. It's in my vocab videos, one of my earlier ones. This one, in many of my vocab videos, I talk about truculence being aggressive. Pugnacious and pugnacity doesn't come up too often, so it may not be in one of my lists, but it's a great word to know. I just thought these two answers were slightly more plausible, because if you're unusually sensitive, these geese, then you're more likely to be angry than arrogant. Like, that was my evidence. If they're in danger, they're imperiled, you're not going to be arrogant. Like, where's the evidence for arrogance? But you're much more likely to be aggressive, pugnacious, truculent. So that was a little bit of a stretch because there was no direct evidence of being angry and aggressive, just this unusually sensitive bit. So that was a hard one. And this one, yes. Noticing that a barb is like a slight, a snub, an insult. And if they're so used to it, they wouldn't be surprised to see barbs and slights and snubs everywhere they look. Happy with that one? This one, yes, it was all about balance. So the correct answer was restoring the balance. I'll let you look over the explanations if you want. Credible was the meaning for plausible here. Yeah, that was fairly simple. I could have possibly gotten that without even reading the passage, but anyway. And yes, I gave you the clues for finding this one, which is that segment is like a synonym for the subset. So I knew we were talking about this, that middle and lower class women were ignored by Murray. And that's one particular segment or subset of the population. And it was rebuttals. Yes, I was fairly sure. I was torn between C and E, furnishing information. I just thought rebuttals makes more sense because those brackets were talking about the physical aspects of dinosaurs and they did directly contradict what these paleontologists were saying. So they were rebuttals. E was very tempting, but I didn't quite... They did furnish information. I just felt that furnish information wasn't quite harsh enough. We needed an answer that more directly addressed how the author was correcting these people who were wrong. And so I like the beginning, provide rebuttals to, more strongly. Very subtle difference there. And this one, very happy with that one. They say very hard. I was sure about the first one, that it allows for greater speed. But B was more about comparing it to mammals, not ectotherms, so I didn't like it. And C just didn't fit because there just wasn't enough evidence about birds flying. That wasn't the focus of the passage. And so I could almost sense that C was wrong without giving you a direct proof. It's just we're not really talking about mesothermic being related to flying. So I didn't like that answer. This one was right. It's counterintuitive because less exposure to germs is giving a rise in allergies. That's counterintuitive. So that word helped me get decreased. And if that is true, and that's the hygiene hypothesis, then we should be wary, cautious of scrubbing our hands and being hygienic all the time. So I was happy with that one. Yes, again. Was this the last one? I'm not sure. No. Eccentric. Yes, I got eccentric because it's quirky, synonym of quirky. Bit of vocab there. And perpetuates, keeps it going. It's the contrast to you're trying to disprove it, but actually it only perpetuates it, only carries it on forward. That's the contradiction. Okay, and this one, yes, I got it right again. Not going to go through the entire thing. It was just that I felt like the word screed, like a long, boring document, gave me the hint about the last one. The author's opinion is that this person is highly misleading. Not like very light, tentative, or rarely myopic. Myopic means short-sighted. So rarely myopic is almost praising. And why would we be praising this author who's written a screed, a boring document? So C was fairly easy. It was just picking the right pair for A and B. And maybe if I'm making a confession, I kind of got it right because I know special interest groups are becoming so powerful these days. So I didn't want to pick marginalized because like everyone knows that lobbyists and corrupt people, special interest groups are so much more powerful. And so I thought they would be influential. It's not like that's why I picked it. It's just like I thought that's probably going to be it. And if they're influential, then this other group, the actual environmentalists, are going to be squelched. And so I saw that pair and I was like, let's just go with it because I don't have time. I could have checked the other pair, like if the special interest group was marginalized, then maybe the environmentalists were lionized. There'd be no evidence to say they're lionized, right? They're not praised anywhere. So that pair wouldn't have made sense anyway. So that's a little confession about how I got that one so quickly. Yes, this one, very hard. Okay, I didn't think this one was the hardest, but it comes down to knowing spurious means like not true based on rumor. And that enabled me, that second word in the sentence enabled me to get the last answer. Once it's been circulated enough, it will gather a pattern, a coating of truth. Like if spurious meant truthful, it wouldn't make sense to say it gathers a coating of truth because it's already truthful. No, I knew that spurious meant doubtful, not true, based on rumor. And so it gathers something they didn't have before, a coating of truth. So the author is claiming that these stories, these sightings, are spurious and doubtful. So they're apocryphal. That's in my vocab list. It means made up, based on stories. However apocryphal they are, it gathers a surface, a facade of truth. And as for the first one, just the other words didn't make sense. This was hard to pick, actually. It's not like the sightings are diminishing. There's no hint, there's no evidence for that. And then I almost got suggest because grammatically it makes more sense than entail in this position. That was a weird one. And finally, yes, okay, I got that. So I got 19 overall, which would have given me the 170 because I think you can get one wrong and get a 170. So given I haven't had much sleep, I'm pretty proud of getting a 170. Yes, I got one wrong, but it was a crazy, crazy hard one I got wrong. So very proud of that, actually. Just quickly, this one, there were two threads to his thoughts that are at first sight, well, most people when they say that sentence, you're going to say at first sight, they're contradictory, they're irreconcilable. But it could have been the others, to be honest. So I was just kind of testing out if it was irreconcilable. I clicked it to see if it made sense if I picked it. And there was an irreconcilable kind of two schools of thought. Like he believed in gradual change, like slow change, but then he also kind of supported that there can be these sudden disappearances of animals and that man causes these massive calamities. And that's kind of a contradiction. So that's why I thought they're irreconcilable. And he was implicating humankind. Implicating means points the finger at humankind for the sudden disappearance of animals, which we all know they do, implying that man was indeed unique among all other species. That one I got more by eliminating others. It's not like we're indebted to the other species because we're eliminating them. That doesn't mean that we're in debt to them. There's no evidence that we're trying to kill them off. I don't think Darwin was saying that. Anyway, to sum up this rather long video, I hope you're not too intimidated by that test because I think it will be slightly harder than the real thing. I am a little bit disappointed that I spent too long on that reading comp passage because in the real test, I think it would be a shorter passage than that. But I guess for all those people who think the real test is getting much, much harder, this is evidence that you can still get a 170 if it is really this long and this hard. And I still read fairly slowly. Some of you may say, okay, well, I read relatively fast compared to how they read. But notice I was always adding in things like, oh, cool, I didn't know that. That's interesting. That's the critical engagement that I talk about in my reading comp advice videos. And for the critical reasoning questions, notice that I predicted an answer before looking at the answer choices. And I always emphasize that in my critical reasoning videos. And finally, notice how so many of the vocab words that came up for sentence equivalence and text completion were featured in my vocab lists. So overall, very happy, and do let me know in the comments if this helped in any way.